Hello and welcome to the third video for painting the Great Unclean One of Nurgle from Games Workshop. Today we're going to be looking at the mouth section on the belly. As usual, you can see the paints that we're going to be using this session on the screen, apart from the Mournfang brown that I accidentally showed there, which will be used later on for some glazing. So here you can see the mouth section already base coloured. The paints I've used for that are Warboss green and Rhinoc's hide. All the paints that I'm going to be using will of course be listed under the video in the description, so don't worry that I haven't shown those on the screen either. They will also be shown during the video when I use them later on, because the green and the Rhinoc's hide will be used to shade the gum area, and the Rhinoc's hide will also be used again for glazing down the teeth. As I said, they'll be shown when we get to that stage. On the wet palette, you can see there is an awful lot of colours. I've been painting other things and just not swapped over the paper yet. The only colours that you need to focus on are on the right. You'll see as I use them, there's the Balor brown. Next to that is the icy yellow, and below that is the white. You can see that I'm painting the teeth. It's going to be very similar to how I've painted horns before. But this time it's even easier because they're much bigger, well, fatter, so you don't have to do such fine lines. But also, the line detail is already sculpted in. Usually for things like this with horns, they're smooth, so when you paint them I have to paint on the dark lines to create those ridges, whereas now the ridges are already done for me, so this is basically just a case of filling in the straight lines. It's going to be a little bit more difficult than it first looks, because some of the teeth are close to each other, so you can't, you don't get to do such smooth brush strokes. But it's not really that hard. This is fairly standard painting. So all you're making sure that you do is don't go over the recesses between each ridge, and leave a small gap around the base of each tooth. I'm using fairly thick paint just because I don't want to spend ages doing lots of coats, because also when I do the glazing and things like that, it'll smooth it all out, so it doesn't need to be extra thin paint or anything like that. I'm not going for the too thin coats technique. However, the paint should be thin enough that it still runs smoothly. You can see there with my poor painting technique for this tooth that I didn't rub the paint off the brush and the paint blobbed, so now I'll have to fix that. And how it seems that I'm fixing that is just by carefully trying to make all the lines. So what I'm actually doing is going into the recess slightly to create the illusion of a straight line. What I really should have done there is use some Rhinoc's hide to correct the line a little bit, but as you'll see by the time that I've finished, you can't notice that anyway. And also, to a certain extent, I don't want the dark lines in between to be too thick. So in the case of some of them, because of the way they're sculpted, the lines are really wide. So you have to just cut into them a little bit. So you're painting highlights on areas that should be shaded, purely so that the lines aren't overpowering on the teeth. So again, it's the same process, just painting straight lines following the detail of the teeth. In this particular case, I will turn the teeth around to do the lines, purely because doing these straight pull lines going down creates a much nicer and easier to follow line going towards the point of the tooth. Normally I would say don't paint the model upside down, because when you turn it around again it looks different to how you painted it. But in this case, because it's such a simple thing that you're doing, it's more beneficial to just turn the section upside down. You'll see that when I get to it, but I'm just preempting the video at the moment. You can see as well the Balor brown, that even though it's quite thick on my palette, it still doesn't create very hard lines. Like, I have to go over it a few times just to get a very definite mark. That's because, again, it's a layer paint. So the difference between the layer paints and the base paints is the thickness of the paint, basically. The base paints are designed to be done in fewer coats, which I find a bit annoying that they have them separated out into different consistencies, because for layer paints you're basically getting less paint because it's watered down. You don't need to have different consistencies of paints and parts. You can mix and create your own consistencies, and you have more control over it. So if you get a thicker paint, you actually have more paint to work with. But my reason for thinking that is because I use a wet palette. Some people do paint straight from the pot. Now, if you are painting straight from the pot, you do need the paints to be a certain smoothness already when you apply them. So I'm guessing for those people, and this is what Games Workshop are thinking, that you know, if they just want to do some quick army things, having watered down paint would be more beneficial for them. But generally speaking, I don't paint from the pot. Right, so what you're seeing here is that I'd made a mistake, and I was actually fixing it correctly. I was using the Rhinoc's hide. It might be a case that it's useful for you to put the Rhinoc's hide on your wet palette early on, so that it lets you fix any mistakes in these teeth. And you will be using the Rhinoc's later on, although you'll be using it, using it for a glaze, and you're using it on the green. So yeah, feel free to have the Rhinocs on the palette already. As I say, it may help you if you make any mistakes for painting on these details on the teeth. So although it's only early stages yet, looking at the teeth, one thing that I will be considering while painting them is the light direction. And again, I'll be using the technique that I've mentioned before, where you hold the model under the lamp and then you can see how the light catches it. It makes it much easier to put light points on. There, as you see the model laying down, you can see shiny sections on it. But when you do that, you have to make sure you're consistent in how you place them. I'll cover that again when we get to that stage, but just something to be aware of when you're painting the model. And the reason I mention that is because when you want to put these light points, it might be easier if you have darker sections in those areas, so that when the light goes over it, the contrast is there to show light points. It's going to, the lower teeth are obviously, the light points are all going to be on top of the teeth, and I'm going to paint that up towards white, so it's going to be almost impossible to show a white shine there, which is something that I've mentioned before on videos. Whereas if you paint all the way up to white, you've got nowhere to go. But because I want the tips of the teeth white, and it makes sense for them to be that way, it doesn't really matter. As you can see here, I'm painting the teeth upside down again. One thing to note while you're doing this, it might be easier if you stick your mouth section onto cork with a bit of blue tack or something like that, it was actually fairly tricky for me to hold this, not so much while doing the teeth, but while painting the green gum sections. You can see how my fingers go over the edge. It also looks a bit like the wet palette has gone out of sync again. I'm really not sure how it manages to do that because they're both recorded at the same time. So regardless, I'll carry on. You can see how the paint is on the wet palette anyway, so it doesn't make that much difference. Now on some of these sections of teeth, because the ridges are so thick, you could, if you wanted, paint these Balor brown lines in much closer, much more finely, so it looked like there are even more ridges on the teeth. And if you wanted to do that for, say, a competition level, that might be beneficial, just to add that extra detail. Right, so what has happened here is, while I was recording that, my camera had run out of battery. I had forgotten to charge it when I did the video, so this was a separate day. Then I carried on and finished off the Balor brown without realising that the wet palette camera had run out of power. However, that did give me the option to start using my new wet palette. I bought a Masterson's wet palette. This is the first time I've ever used a bought wet palette. Usually I just make them on my own, but I thought that it would be more useful for videos so I can get a perfectly smooth palette and you can see the paints more clearly. But I'll be doing a quick review later on for how I find the palette. This is obviously very early stages, so I want to see how it works over a few days and see if it keeps the paint consistent or not. So what I'm doing here is going straight on to the ice yellow. So the three paints on the palette at the time are the Balor brown, the ice yellow and the white. The different paper on the wet palette has made the paints look different in the video compared to the previous section, but don't worry, they are the same colours. It's still Balor brown at the top, below that is ice yellow, and to the right is the what is it called? Morrow white from P3. But again, use whichever white you like, it's not that important. So I'm using the ice yellow to further highlight each ridge on the tooth, on each individual tooth. I'm not going all the way over the Balor brown lines. It's using a millimetre or so lower down, and this will create a transition. Also try and keep the lines a little bit thinner. It doesn't matter towards the tip of the tooth where it still wants to be fairly thick, but you want the lines at the top near the gum sections to be a bit thinner so you can see some of that Balor brown underneath, because otherwise you're wasting your time having done the Balor brown. But if you, another point to this, if you just painted ice yellow on top of Rhinoc's hide, the colour will be different. So there is a certain transparency to paint, and the Balor brown is taking away some of the darkness from Rhinoc's hide. So when you put the ice yellow over the top of that, it's a stronger colour. If you did that ice yellow straight on top of Rhinoc's hide, it wouldn't look so clean and nice. So even if you don't see all the Balor brown, it's still useful to do that sort of thing. You can see they're quite chunky lines that I'm still putting on, but as I say, I'm not doing this as a competition piece, but also the style of the model I think works quite well with chunky quick painting. So Also, fortunately, since I started using the new wet palette, I've synced up the videos again, so there was some benefit to the camera running out of power. So again, you're doing exactly the same thing on the bottom row of teeth as I did on the top, and that emphasises the fact that this isn't light effect, this is a colour transition of the teeth. So it's probably, if you want to think of a reason for it, it's probably that the teeth are a bit dirty getting up towards the gums and they're really dark and grotty around there. But I am going to do some interesting effects later on as well, which will be helped by the fact that the teeth are darker towards the gums. You can see it's a very easy process, again just painting straight lines over the Balor brown. If you notice as well, I'm just using the tip of the brush to apply the paint to give me rather more control over how it is applied on the model. However, because I'm being so lazy and not wiping the paint off properly to get these lines down, some of them are looking quite disgustingly thick. But again, it's these things will all be fixed with the process, because there are so many steps. It will hide all these mistakes and rough parts on the model. And you can see there, as well as I go along, I tend to just quickly neaten up little areas that I've noticed are a bit rough. And one thing that you could do while you're doing this painting is by putting the mouth back onto the Great Unclean One as you go along, just to test to see that the style of painting that you're doing is fitting in with what you've already done. It is a problem that you can run into when painting models in sections, that the pieces don't complement each other very well when you stick the model together at the end. So I would recommend, if you're painting models in sections, to constantly keep putting the sections against each other to make sure that they all match. It's not such a big issue with this part of the Great Unclean One, because it's fairly independent in terms of colour, and I'm still using the Rhinoc's hide on this and on the skin section, so that'll tie them together. So it's actually quite hard to go too far wrong, but it is again something to be aware of when you're painting models in separate sections. So there's all the ice white done on the teeth. Ice yellow, sorry. So now we're on to the Morrow white. And this is a very quick and easy step. It's just doing the tips of the teeth, following the same lines again that you've already done twice, and just making the tips white. Now what you will find when you do this is that the teeth start to look very bright. And really, teeth in general, I mean, you won't see teeth go up to perfect clear white. There's usually an off-white look to them. And what happens is when you see people in films and things when they have really bright teeth, it's just because the contrast is so high and the lighting is really bright on them. But yeah, but purely for the technique that I'm using on this is why I'm going to the white tips, because I'm going to be glazing colours on top of them, and this brightness is not going to be there at the end, especially when I use the blood technique on it. Using the well, I'm going to be using the blood for the blood god special paint. Technical paint thing that Games Workshop does. I've not actually used it before, but I have a good idea of how it works, so it's not too much of a surprise for me. You can really see now how using the Rhinoc as the base and then painting up to pure white is such a strong contrast between the details and the teeth. If you were just painting this just for some quick tabletop gaming, I probably wouldn't even recommend using the white paint on them. I'd just save that for if you wanted to do some quick light reflections, which I show when we get to them. But as I say, it makes the teeth really bright at this stage using this. Another thing that's quite nice about having them bright, actually, though, is because the mouth behind it is completely in shadow almost. It's a big hole in the belly, so there's a nice contrast between the brightness of the teeth and the dark shadow goes behind them. You can see how much quicker it was doing the white section just by comparing it on the video compared to the Balor brown stage. I've nearly finished all of the white sections on the teeth now, just because it doesn't seem like it's that much less painting, because it's you're going over the same lines again, but to a certain extent you build up a little bit of muscle memory just doing those few lines, so you're repeating the process using less paint on a smaller area, and it gets if you're doing batch painting like this, you can get to a stage where you do these so quickly. Of course, why you'd want to batch paint Great Unclean Ones, I don't know, but there we go. So now we're going to be glazing. You can see I've put my normal well palette on the top left over the wet palette, and it's going to be Rhinoc's hide and Mournfang brown. They're already mixed this time on the palette. I've done a few videos now showing you how to create glazes, and it's just quite a lot of water and a small amount of paint, and then you rub it off on the kitchen towel until it looks almost dry on the brush. So I'm starting off with the Mournfang brown, which is the lower paint on the well palette, and covering nearly the whole of each tooth, leaving just the tip to show through as white. But because of I'm going to be glazing, doing lots of glazing, pulling back all the colours, you can see there actually already started, goes almost completely to the very top, but when you do the lines, you're kind of going in reverse to how you painted the teeth marks on. So you're going towards the gums, because you want the most of the paint, or glaze in this case, and you leave more paint on the model where the brush leaves it. So you're darkening even more towards the gum area. So what happens is, even if you just keep going over the same area constantly, because more paint leaves the brush when it gets to the gum section, it'll actually get darker there quicker than at the top of the tooth. You can already see how much, how dulled down this is, just from these very quick few layers. You might notice as well I'm only painting one side of the teeth. I did have a quick check, you can't see the back of the teeth at all. As I was mentioned before, I said it's a good idea to stick this section on a bit of blue tack on a cork. I've dropped this countless times while painting it. It seems terrible, the idea that I've got butterfingers for holding things when I'm supposed to be doing able to do high quality paintwork, but it's just a case of I'm aware that I can rub the paint off the model, so I hold it very gently. Some people use gloves while they do painting. I don't like that. I like to feel exactly what I'm touching. Or I prefer to have it attached to something. That's why I use the model holders. So now I'm using the Rhinoc hide. Same process. Put the paint, the glaze on the brush, and rub it on kitchen towel until hardly any paint comes off. When applying this one, do not go too high. The Rhinocs will make the tips of the teeth look very dirty and not smooth. It'll look kind of bitty and coffee stained if you try and glaze over white with such a dark colour. But as I was saying before, all the lines where I was a little bit rough and they weren't quite perfect, these glazes, they just they pull it all together and it hides many of the problems that I painted. So I was aware that this would happen. That's why I wasn't too concerned when I didn't do perfect lines. You can see it's so nice when you're using glazes. It's such quick work, and it makes just a nice subtle difference. It makes your work look much neater and smoother. Now, if you consider how long it's taken just to do those the few glazes, it's not that big a time frame. It is something you could do if you were doing, again, lining your models up and batch painting. There we go, there are the teeth done, ready for the next stage. So what I'm going to be doing now is putting the white reflections on. And as I mentioned earlier in the video, because the teeth at the bottom, the light would reflect on the tips, it's quite hard to show that. So what I decided next was to go for ice yellow for putting in the reflections on at the top. Now the top ones are where you get some nice reflection points. You can see how I'm using how the lamp, how the light is hitting the top of the teeth. You see there, so you just put in these little dots at the top, and that shows how it makes the teeth look shiny. You can see it's just kind of blobs and strange shapes and things like that. The thing to remember when you're doing these dots of highlights, these are actually supposed to represent the light source that is hitting them, that's making them like this. So, and they get distorted by the surface of whatever they're hitting. So you don't have to do perfectly round dots each time when you're doing these dots. The reason I decided to go for the ice yellow for the highlights is one, so it's not such a stark spot against the Rhinoc's hide, but also it allows me to then use the white on top of them to make it kind of glow a little bit. So the white dot will go in the center of the ice yellow dots. So here I am back using the Morrow white again, just to put the dots in the center of the ice yellow ones. It is a case as well of every time you see the camera shake, it's because I've headbutted it. I've tried having the camera further away with a longer lens, and I just don't get the same image quality that I get where I can have it right next to me. So what I'm doing here is putting some Rhinoc hide on the wet palette. As I mentioned earlier on in the video, where I said it might be handy to have some Rhinoc hide on the palette so you can do corrections as you go along. In this case, I felt like some of the highlight reflections at the top were too big, so I'm using the Rhinoc hide to tighten them up a bit. And also because I'll be using the Rhinoc hide again on the green section of the gums and things, it would have been handy to have the Rhinoc hide on the white palette to begin with. So I'm just coming back and just retouching up again. So what happened here is the highlight spot had gone over into the recess, and it just made it look a bit messy. Now what I'm doing here is just dragging the highlight down a bit So it already has a highlight of white on, and I'm using the ice yellow just to pull it down, so it's like a distorted reflection. Because it's such a large area on that tooth, it's the biggest tooth on the in the mouth, and this draws the eye to it even more, and really emphasises that shine. But I didn't use the white, pure white, to pull down the highlight. Here I've left too much paint on the brush again. But if you notice, it's the central parts of the teeth that I'm just putting these highlights down on. But as I said, so I'm using nice yellow because I still want it to be the highest point of the white at the very top of the tooth. So really, I'm spending more time on these than I actually planned to. But sometimes it's the case I got a bit carried away when I was going along and actually quite enjoyed it. So as you can see there, it looks like they're shiny, but it's actually fairly matte. Okay, now we're going to be working on the green gums. So it's Warboss green, Elysian green, Evil Sun Scarlet, Rhinoc hide. The Evil Sun Scarlet is again going to be a glaze, but the other paints are, you can see them on the palette now, they're all going to be used as solid paints as well. So what I'm doing is going straight in with the Rhinoc hide again. It's already used on the teeth, so using it on the green still, ties everything together. And it's also going to make it look much darker and grottier. Really get that grim dark kind of feel to the model, because the Warboss green is already fairly bright green, and it doesn't work with the style of the painting that I'm doing for the Great Unclean One. But the colour of the green is still quite nice to show through. And because Rhinoc hide in particular, even though it's supposed to be a base paint, it still has a fairly transparent effect. So I can just slap this paint on fairly haphazardly, just getting it in all the shadow areas and things, and it still has an almost transitional effect on some of the green. You can see there, this is a base colour straight on top of where's the Warboss? There we go. Of a layer colour. So I'm using the base colour on top of a layer colour, yet the layer colour actually has a stronger or is more opaque. So go through and pick out all the details, every recess on the green with the Rhinoc hide. It's better to do it this way than the opposite way. What you might think is, oh, if you painted everything with Rhinoc hide and then painted the green on top, but this actually works much better for the transitions by shading the green down. If you painted the green on top, it would look much starker, and it's harder to work it in. It's nearly always harder to paint up from a very dark colour than it is to work a colour down. This is especially true for things like yellows and reds. Now it's important to remember that this mouth goes inside the belly on the Great Unclean One, so all these edges have to be darkened down because those will actually be recessed against the belly area. Just sticking my fingers all over it. Now you can already see the effect that it's had on the. It's emphasised the teeth. You can see them again, still looking like they're shining, even though they're not shining. That's just the paint effect. And now I can go back again and use the Warboss green, and in some cases I don't clean the brush off between each section, which again kind of blends the paint as you're applying it down. I am going to be using, as I've mentioned a couple of times now, the blood for the blood god technique on top of all this around the teeth. So it doesn't need to be perfect, the transition, but it does help because you're not going to put blood everywhere. I want to use it sparingly. So if you have it fairly neat, it'll just make it look that little bit more polished. As I was saying, so some of the paint was still wet, the Rhinoc's hide was still wet, particularly in these recessed areas. So if you apply the green, the Warboss green, it's still blending in on the brush. So I'm also going to start using, at this point, the Elysian green. I'm using this as a further highlight colour. I really like the Elysian green for Death Guard things in general, so I thought it would be a good idea to use it on my Nurgle demons. It'll tie the models together in the army. But also it's got a nice yellow tinge to it, so it's got a bit more of a sickly tone to it. And also because the blood for the blood god, when that goes on, although green is a nice contrast to red, you always have to be careful of that Christmas tree effect by having red and green on the area, and by making this green much more yellowy, it takes away that that feeling. So it's just a case of going over and over. So, I used the Elysian green at that stage just because I wanted to double check how it would work on the model. I already had a rough idea, obviously, because that's why I selected the paint to begin with. But it's always nice just to get a bit of paint down as a benchmark for applying it all over. So if you pay careful attention when you're painting these strands of goo or whatever it is as well, or just rotten tendons or something anyway, they do kind of twist around, so make sure you follow those twists and get some detail on there. It'll just enhance the model a bit as well. So I'd carried on doing a little bit more blending there in between. And now I'm going to highlight up even more the raised sections just to make to pop out some of the detail. Something interesting that you could do on these, which I didn't, but I was considering at the time, there are little pustule type things all over this gum area. It would be interesting to paint those as yellow and then shade them down with red going into Rhinoc's hide around them to make them look kind of sore and horrible. The yellow will go nicely with the green. It's something to consider if you wanted to do that. I decided not to bother because there's already some yellow in the green, so it's kind of having a little bit of that effect as it is. But it's just something to think about if you wanted to take the detail level even further on your piece. So I'm actually painting on details that aren't there, making it look a bit more, put like a couple of ridges and things around the gum sections on some of the teeth, just to add a bit of detail, make it more visually exciting. Oh, one thing as well that I did in between some of these video sections, you may notice now on the teeth there are a couple of scratches. I did that because I'd actually, without paying attention, I'd got a bit of Rhinoc's hide on one of the teeth, so I just turned it into a scratch and thought it looked okay. It's the same effect. I've done it in on the horn videos as well, so it was just a Rhinoc's hide line going straight across to cut through the vertical ridges on the teeth, and then using the ice yellow as a very fine underline on the lower section of the line to create that 3D look. I didn't use any white on those at all because I wanted to keep the scratches fairly small looking. So what I'm actually going to do now is use a little bit of the ice yellow on the green gum section as well. That I didn't mention that on the colours that I was going to use for that small section of video, but it should already be on your palette, so don't change your palette in between. But these are going to be again little highlight points just to re-emphasise the light direction. And you can see there I just tried to keep the dots consistently with the points on the teeth. Now the reason I'm using the ice yellow is because again it's got that yellow tinge to it which the Elysian green already had, so this is just kind of another step up in the highlight stage. It matches quite well against it. So the light's obviously coming from an upper area that I'm painting on now, so only do the top sections on all these bumps and details, don't paint underneath them. As you can see, I'm putting on them all on as dots again, and small marks. Some are details that are sculpted on, some are just marks that I'm putting on at random, but again it makes it look more detailed as a piece. Just emphasising that twist on the green section I was talking about earlier. Now if you wanted to do underlighting on these sections, you wouldn't use the ice yellow. The ice yellow is the light that's coming straight down. The reflected light would be coming off the ground or something like that, so you'd have to pick a different colour and a softer colour as well, because the light obviously doesn't want to overpower the main light source. I don't think you'd get that much reflected light on this, but if it was something you wanted to do. then it's again something to consider. On some future pieces that I'm going to be painting, I will be doing multiple light sources just to do some more complicated painting, make it a bit more fun and interesting. Right, so that's the end of the painting stage. Oh no, it isn't. I forgot. I probably used the Evil Sun Scarlet. So I'm going to be glazing that on all over the green. I did something similar on the Death Shroud Terminators that I painted. It's doing multiple things. It's softening in all the highlights again, making all the transitions work more clearly. It's adding a nice red tone in with the green, and also it helps to prepare ready for when I add the blood for the blood god, because as I said, I want to do that in a very limited way. I don't want to just cover all the painting that I've been doing, but while I still want the red raw look to all the teeth. And it might be a case of, once this is finished, that you prefer the look of it without the blood for the blood god effect. I just thought it'd be fun to try it. But if that's the case, then well, obviously don't use blood for the blood god, because it does look quite nice at this stage anyway. You don't need to. But again, this is it's quite a fun stage. This red glaze, it's very quick and simple. Just pulls all the transitions together, going over the highlight points as well, softens those down. It creates different tones of red, so you've got red going over green, red going over yellow, red going over almost white with the ice yellow, so it makes it more pink in those sections. So you've got like pink, reddy green, and sort of brown where it's in the darker areas. It's something else to think about as well when you're doing colours on models. You can have multiple colours overlapping in different consistencies and strengths in different areas, and it creates different colours and nice extra detail without having to work too hard for the detail that you're adding. So this is making the mouth area look very raw and gross. I'm going to be doing a similar effect actually around the actual mouth of the Great Unclean One. He's basically going to have 3 mouths when I finish, because he has one on his arm as well. Where the colours on the whole model are generally more bright, this helps create a nice contrast and keeps that grim dark look that I want to achieve as well. So there we are. That's almost the final bit. Just a couple more red areas. Just as a final touch. Now you can see how all those really bright highlights that I was putting on the green have been pulled right back, and now they just work as part of the transition. the video's got out of sync with the wet palette again. I'm not sure how this keeps happening. I seem to be bending space-time, but again, I'm using a slightly larger brush for these glaze sections, so it just lets me keep painting for longer. There's no reason to use a tiny brush for glazing, just as long as your brush has a good point on it. So here we are, time for Blood for the Blood God. Now, as I've already mentioned, you don't have to do this stage if you don't want to. I don't really use technical paints very much. I'm much more of the opinion that you should learn to paint techniques using normal paint, but I thought it would be a bit of fun to try it. So I'm actually painting straight from the pot as well. I assumed that the paint would be designed to be used that way. I'm using my mixing brush at this stage, but it does start to split a little bit, so I swapped to a normal brush. I'm not entirely sure how good the Blood for the Blood God is for your brushes. It seems like it's a gloss kind of paint, so maybe don't use expensive brushes if you want to keep them in good condition. What I'm doing is I'm applying the paint in the dark areas mainly. So it works with the dark browns and the greens that are already there, makes them even darker. The gloss in particular darkens areas anyway. But this is actually creating shine on the model as well. So that will complement the shine that I've already, the artificial shine that I already painted on the teeth. I'm putting a bit of red on the teeth so it looks like they've been eating something, got a bit of gore on there. Now if you wanted, it does seem that if you just took this at a very early stage and just sloshed this Blood for the Blood God all over it, you would get a similar sort of effect that would be good for tabletop anyway. So there we are. There's the teeth with Blood for the Blood God on. I think it's it works quite well. It was definitely fun to have a play with. So I hope you enjoyed the video, and looking forward to the next one. Thank you very much.